Hello, welcome to Chapter 2. In this chapter, we're going to describe data distributions. In other words, we're going to look at how data is distributed and figure out how to describe it. And how we describe it is going to depend in some sense on its shape. In this first section, we are going to talk about some of those shapes. In other words, types of data distributions. The first video, we're going to focus on examples of what are called multimodal distributions. These are distributions that have several peaks of significance. We're going to see a couple of examples from the World of Warcraft data. We've seen this graph before. This is the distribution of the relative frequency of various races and classes in the game World of Warcraft. In the class graph, we can see, if we sketched it out, there are a few peaks of significance. Right? If you follow my cursor, we kind of move up here and get a small peak at Hunter, comes down and back up, another small peak at Rogue, comes down and back up at another significant peak at Warrior. This is multimodal because there are these three relative peaks. Similarly, for race, we might consider this as a graph with one mode, unimodal, because we might kind of discount this peak as statistical noise. And so the graph, we might, if we sketched it, smoothed it into a line, look more like, if you follow the cursor, something that starts high and just decreases and flattens. If, however, this peak with trolls is actually significant, then we might think of this as another, albeit smaller, peak, and think of this as a bimodal graph, two modes, multimodal with two peaks. So a lot with this in this graph depends on how significant this apparent peak at troll is. Actually, it's lower than orc. You notice orc is at 18.9%, troll is at 17.9%. So I'm inclined to consider this to be unimodal. Let's look at another example. These two examples are difficult to look at because we have very few categories. But if we look at another example, we can see this idea of multimodality take shape. The other example is this thing called the retention curve. What the retention curve is it's a reflection of players who, once they download the game, come back and actually play the game so many days after the initial download. Right? So down on the horizontal axis, we've got days since install, and on the vertical axis, we have the relative percentage who have their last login to the game that many days since install. So there are a few little peaks and valleys across the entire graph. None of those are significant. I don't think these are very significant in particular, even though they look big. It looks like statistical noise to me. And the shape of this graph would start up here on the left, come down into this U shape, and increase back up near the right-hand side. And this goes out to, I think, 365 days since install. So this is a retention curve over a year. So this is multimodal, and notice that our peaks are at the endpoints, hence the U shape. In the next video, we're going to look at examples of unimodal graphs, graphs with only one peak, and we're going to look at three different types of such graphs: symmetric, right skewed, and left skewed.